both Sam and Satch really need no introduction in Chicago. Sam is someone that I admire a lot because not only someone I looked up to when I was trying to get into the tech space in Chicago, but also I used to work for Sam at ShopRunner. And Sam has always been not only a great friend, personal friend, but also a great mentor to me in my career. Whenever I'm thinking of a next move, whenever I'm, when I'm thinking about things that are way above my mind can go, is a phone call that I make, and he always takes it. So shout out to him. So we're gonna talk about his founder story. And from the days of SparkNotes, OkCupid, and the other stuff he has going on with Corazon Capital, and then kind of his thoughts on the state of the Chicago tech ecosystem. So let's talk about like being a founder. What are the most important qualities and characteristics that contribute, to your entrepreneurial success?
I mean, I think it's simultaneously the total willingness to fail and the refusal to fail. Simultaneously. I think everything I have done, I've gone into fully expecting that the most likely outcome is failure. And you then spend the rest of your time desperately trying not to fail. And I think it is that combination that I think you have to look for in founders, that I look for in founders when I'm, as an investor or as a mentor. Fear of failure is what will most, I think, kill founders and startups.
When it comes to strategies businesses can employ to stay ahead in transforming environment, what are some key trends or technologies that people should be aware of?
Are you thinking like bigger companies or startups or?
I think this is a very startup environment, so let's think startups to kind of growth stage companies.
Look, I think we operate in, startups are in the most dynamic part of what is generally a very dynamic industry, right? And so one of the most important questions to ask yourself is when do you stay committed to the path you're on, and when do you pivot, iterate, innovate in your own product? And this is something I see founders struggle with all the time. I recently had a company in our portfolio that had raised at a pretty healthy price, raised $8 million, and then one day called me and said, "I don't think this is a good business." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "I'm going to fire everybody who works for me, and I'm going to come up with a new idea." Right? So that was someone who had the realization that to stay on the path, which is the easy thing to do, was going to end up in failure. The hard thing to do is to have the conversation with your investors that the thing I just pitched you literally 4 months ago, I'm out, and I'm just going to try again on an idea that you don't know anything about. So that's, I think that's one of the really ultimate examples of this idea of I'm operating in a very dynamic environment, and to say AI for the 1 millionth time today, I think a lot of founders are coming in and they're saying my value proposition or my technology or my product is threatened by what's happening, and how do I react to that? And again, fear is what will kill you, and so you have to just kind of lean in, and I think you have to really think in the very long term.
You started a few companies. You started SparkNotes, which sold. OkCupid also sold, and I'm sure and now you're doing Corazon Capital. Let's talk about some unexpected key lessons you learned as a founder. And I'm sure that's a very long answer, but yeah, what are some unexpected key lessons that from all the journeys that that we've been through?
I mean, there's 1,000. What do you want me to focus on? I can talk fundraising, talk co-founders, can talk sale processes, talk the role of luck. I mean, there's just everything.
I would say fundraising and kind of the early days of founding.
I learned the hard way that choosing your co-founders is the most important thing you do. It's more important than what business you choose. It's more important than even who you take capital from, although that's a close second. I have been in a situation where I've had to fire a co-founder, which was something that I hadn't even contemplated when I co-founded my first company. So I just think I got very lucky that every other co-founder I've worked with, except for this one, ended up being someone who 10 times smarter than me, very good friend to this day, like in each other's weddings and stuff like that. But this, the cost of making a bad co-founding decision can break your business. I think similarly, getting the wrong investors can do that. And I see founders all the time. In fact, I'm in a conversation with a founder right now, and founders can get so focused on valuation, or can get so focused on the name of the firm or whatever, and can really, I think, forget that you're in a decade-long, like if you're in a success case, you're in this business for a decade. If you're building a great company, you're gonna be in this for a decade. And especially early stage investors, these are the people who are gonna have your back. Like these are the people who you're gonna be most aligned with. As you get more and more money, you're likely to get more and more misaligned with your investors. It's your earliest stage investors who are the people who are ultimately gonna be most aligned with you, economically, probably philosophically. And I see people put, just take the most, the best valuation, or someone who seems like it's a big industry name but doesn't know anything about startups. And I've been in boardrooms and on cap tables with people who I see lead the founders astray and ultimately like really damage the business. So I have been very blessed to have co-founders and capital partners who have really helped me, grow to be the person that I've become and have the successes that I've been very fortunate to have.
For those people in the room that don't know the OkCupid origin story, could you kind of go over kind of like how it all came about? And I've always thought it's a really interesting story.
We had been dabbling when we started SparkNotes. We had been dabbling in some online dating products in the late '90s, and but we were always intrigued by the dating is just a cool category to be in. It's sexy, and we were a bunch of Harvard math majors, and so we needed all the help we could get, doing something interesting. So, and we were always intrigued by, the early days of online dating, where, and this was back when like only losers online dated. At least that's what all the VCs told me when I tried to raise institutional capital, and you had all these people out in the market who basically were these old dudes who were trying to like sell women that they could figure out who your soulmate was. Like this is eHarmony, the old guy, Dr. Neil Clark Warren, and Dr. Phil was the Match spokesman. And they would be like, oh, we know who your soulmate is. And we were always like, that's not the problem. You're all solving the wrong problem. The problem in dating isn't I don't know who to date. The problem is I don't meet enough people, right? People have been knowing who to date forever. Like that's how we are all here, literally, is we had people, our parents figured out how to date. And so it's a volume problem, not a matching problem. And so that was sort of the biggest problem we saw in the market. The actual founding story was my partner and very, very good friend, Chris, was at a bar on the Lower East Side of Manhattan one day in 2002 on a Friday, and he called me, and he was totally drunk, and he said, I want to start a dating site. Yes, I said site because this was 2003. There were no apps. And he's like, I want to start a dating site, and I wanted to have a big button called the blind date button, and people are going to come, they're going to hit the button, and we're going to set them up on, the computer's just going to set them up on dates. And I was like, that's a terrible idea. And so hung up, and I was like, he'll never remember this. But he calls me the next morning, really early, for someone who had been drinking so much. And he's like, what do you think of my idea? And I'm like, you're not serious, are you? And he's like, we're totally doing this. And so then we spent the next 6 months sort of thinking about, okay, let's say you did want a website with a button, which nobody wants. What would you do? And then we were like, well, you have to build a website with a lot of people. You have to build a standard dating site first. So that was how we got to OkCupid. And we decided to really emphasize, this idea of having as many people as possible, which sounds obvious to you, but every other dating site to that day had focused on fewer people with a paid model versus a freemium model. And so we were the first of the sort of free online dating sites and products that are now ubiquitous down the road.
What a lot of people, I think a lot of people in this room that are kind of like a newer generation of people that are in Chicago tech probably don't know is that you co-founded Accelerate Labs, which is now Techstars Chicago. Tell us a bit about why you decided to do that, and how do you think the Chicago tech ecosystem has shifted over the past 10 plus years, and where do you think we're still lacking in our process?
Okay, well, I'll start by sort of talking about failure, and then I'll get back and I'll say some contrarian things about where we are now. So I moved back. I was born and raised in and around Chicago. I went to the coasts for school and startups, and then I came back in 2007. And I tried to sort of meet people in the community here. And I had the great privilege of living in Boston, New York, and San Francisco, so I thought there were tech communities everywhere. And I got back here, and the very first year that I lived in Chicago, I was trying to network with the community, and I met 8 people. 8 in a year. Like literally the number of people in your row, like I met that in a year. And so I was like, well, okay, and there were interesting people doing things in all, in the suburbs and, in Ravenswood and all this, but there was no community. And so I was like, oh, we should do something about that. And I then, was doing some research and found that in 2009, there were 19 companies that did Techstars. Only 19 companies in all of Techstars. 5 of the 19 came from Chicago and left to Boston and Boulder. So I was like, oh, there's definitely there are great founders here, and they're leaving in droves to these other places. So I had the brilliant idea of we should have our own version of Techstars here. And so we called Techstars, and they had no interest in coming to Chicago. And so a group of us were like, well, we should just do an accelerator. Do you know how much money we tried to raise for our accelerator? $330,000. That was what we needed to run a year. And so I was like, oh, this will be so easy. I'll go to all the VCs in town. They'll each throw in 25 grand. It'll be so easy. And I went to all of the named VCs that you all know, and I got laughed out of every single one. And they were like, we will not give you $25,000 because this is certain to fail. And I was like, it's $25,000. Who cares? Like, you spend more than that on sponsoring an event, whatever. And so 2 firms ended up doing it, and that first class of Techstars had some great companies in it. That demo day that we had at the House of Blues in 2010 was one of the great days of my life, and I think of the history of the Chicago ecosystem. So this was a story where everybody thought we would fail, and the probable outcome was that we would fail. But we were like, we're not going to let that stop us, and so we built it. Fast forward to where we are now, I think we're in a bit of a rut. What's the last great tech company to be founded in Chicago? That's still great.
You're doing the talking.
We can do call response.
I'm just asking the questions.
I'm just saying, let's, I was at a dinner recently sponsored by someone, you might know, and everybody went around the table being like, how come we don't get the credit that the coasts get? How come people look down and, we're not San Francisco? And I just said, what's the last great tech company that was founded in Chicago? Okay? I'm not saying there aren't any. I'm just saying you go to a lot of other ecosystems and you're going to get people in a fist fight over which is the best company. Okay? And we have great companies here. I'm a supporter of them. I'm an investor in a lot of them. But we don't have these runaway, where's our sort of generational company here? So I think the challenge that I would throw out is we need more outcomes. We need more outcomes. And the challenge to the founders here is let's aim bigger. And let's stay independent.
When you say outcomes, how big of outcomes you're looking for? How do you think we'll get there?
I think it's a combination. I think we don't have enough capital here. I think we don't have enough. I think we have a lot of companies have sold prematurely when they could have gone on and built bigger businesses. I think we have had companies that have not been as responsive to markets and willingness. I don't want to get into specific companies, but I can think of 3 companies that were market leaders in their category that got surpassed by other people because the other people were willing to think bigger and were willing to think about their own, sort of what the next evolution of the market could be. In the same way, like when I was running Match, nobody at Match wanted Tinder to happen. But when we started Tinder, Tinder became 10 times bigger than Match. Okay, and that is what that was the thing that made disrupting Match so special. And I have not seen a similar willingness for people who have gotten to that $1 billion valuation, $1 billion plus, to say, okay, we're not going to disrupt ourselves. And how do we go 10x that? How do we do something that makes everything we've done to date obsolete? That's the challenge.
Good note to end on. Sam, always keeping it real, my guy. Appreciate you. Thank you for coming to the talk.